we'll go ahead and get started. Today's River Management Roundtable is reliable river signage, clarity, consistency, and digital integrations. And our guest today will be Nancy Stewart from the Minnesota DNR and Jack Henderson from the French Broad Paddle Trail. We do each month, the River Management Society hosts virtual conversations with professional river, greenway, and water trails leaders, planners, and managers whose community, region, state, and federal river will benefit from the experience of peer-to-peer sharing. Our goal is to facilitate an open forum to support your work managing rivers. We work together to tackle common issues by asking questions, sharing solutions, and building camaraderie. And to help with that, today, know that we're going to do a recording so that we'll be able to share this roundtable in the future so other people can learn from what we're doing today. We invite everyone to turn your camera on, be muted unless you're speaking, and feel free to pop questions into the chat. And we're going to have 15 or 20 minutes at the end for a discussion and questions there as well if you want to hold on to those and talk about it. And we want to ask everybody to listen and contribute respectfully. We seek understandings, allow others to be heard, respect differences and similarities, speak for yourself and not others, and keep comments concise and relevant. And so with that, welcome. And we'd like to welcome Nancy Stewart, Water Recreation Consultant, Division of Parks and Trails, Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, and Jack Henderson, French Broad Paddle Trail Manager and Mountain True French Broad Riverkeeper. And Nancy, you can go ahead.
Thank you, James. Hi, everyone. I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about the Minnesota State Water Trail Program. We going to go over a little bit of our maps and our signs, and then we'll just kind of see what questions come in. But you can go to the next slide. Minnesota has a lot of water, so just want to orientate you to the state. We have almost 70,000 miles of rivers and streams, 11,000 lakes. We have 310 public water access sites. That is a mix of motorized and carry-in. And in that, we have 35 designated state water trails. They are designated in the in statute and legislature. And then we have 815 registered boats in 2023. About 615 of those are motorized, with 200,000 being non-motorized. And for non-motorized, those have to be over 10 feet to be registered. Next slide. And so here's the water trail system. It's a pretty good spread around the state of Minnesota. All this data is available in GIS layers, which really helps us create those really detailed maps. So you can see all the miles of water trails. And then we have on the rivers, there's 662 public water access sites, 411 water trail campsites, and then some rest areas and 124 portages. So next slide. We provide a few different types of maps. So on our website, we do have an interactive map. It starts with a statewide view that's kind of in the corner there, and you can see there's a legend that you can kind of click on and off. And as you start to zoom in on the map, more features start to fill in. You start to be able to see the water trail names. And you see under river gauges, there's a button to click show. And then those are like all the little yellow and green spots. And then that gives you a reading for how good the paddling has been interpreted for the level off of that water gauge. So it's a pretty cool feature that we have for paddlers. And then the further you zoom in, the more detail you get, and you start to get the icons, and then you can click on any of the icons to get more information from that feature. All right, next slide. And then we also offer PDF maps. So you can either look at the PDF maps online and print them yourselves, or you can order them from our DNR Information Center. And so we have a A to Z listing of all the Minnesota state water trails, or again, you can click on the map if you kind of know an area state you're going to visit or something like that. That could be helpful. And then that takes you to the water trail page. And then within that page, there's additional information. You can go to the next slide. And then there's the PDF map. And so the PDF maps have two sides, basically the information side and then the map and description side. I didn't zoom in on these, but they're really nice if you wanted to go to the website and take a look. Next slide. And then we also offer Geo PDF maps. And so these are available through the Avenza app. So if you haven't used Avenza, it's really pretty cool. You can get it from either the App Store or Google Play. And you just go in and download it. It's free. And then next slide. And then once you get into the app, you gotta click on the store button. It's a little, it's because you don't have to buy, at least you don't have to buy our maps. I think there are some maps for sale on there. But you just click on like what you want to, or you just type in what you want to find. Like I put in the Root River State Water Trail, which I know is something that's going to come up, but lots of maps come up for different parts of the state in that area. There's a bike trail, there's a water trail, there's a few different options. And so then you can just download the map, and then it allows you to navigate with that on your phone, and it just is using your GPS location. So it's tracking that on the map, but you don't need internet or cell service. So it's a really good way to be out on a water trail or on other trails and know where you are at all times. Okay, so I think that's the end of our maps. Now we're going to get into signs. I'm just going to warn you, we have a pretty old-fashioned sign system. They did intentionally mean to have it be rustic. It was developed, I think, in the 1990s, but it could have even been earlier than that. And when we first started doing this, all the signs were made in a DNR sign shop. So it was relatively low cost. Now they're no longer made in our sign shop, so it's got to be expensive. So they created these wood signs with these little corner cuts, and then it's yellow on a brown background. They seem to have kind of a short life because depending on the wood they use, they either kind of rot or they crack. And of course, they're high maintenance because you have to paint them to keep them fresh looking. So anyway, I'll show you some examples of these signs, and then we'll get into a couple of a new system. So next slide. So here's some sign examples. On its own post, there's an aluminum version that's been used. I don't like signs stuck to trees, but I thought I would throw these in here anyway because that happens when you send staff out to put up signs. Next slide. So here's some watercraft campsite signs, and you can see they just don't really pop. When they're kind of up on the bank, you need to put them up out of the floodplain area. And so I'm not quite sure how well these serve the users. And I've been asking the staff to maybe put a reflector on them so someone could maybe see them in the light, but I don't think any of these have that. So anyway, we can go to the next slide. So here's an access sign. Again, this is, supposed to direct somebody to the takeout location. The one on the right, the access sign is on aluminum, but that's the sign laying down. So I'm not quite sure what happened there. And that's facing the parking lot. Hopefully we have one from the water view as well. Next slide. And then, there's signs for portages. That's the upside down canoe, which is very cute. And then it looks like on the one side, somebody just kind of made their own square cut portage sign, which honestly it's fine. So, gets the message across at least. Next slide. And then when we have watercraft campsites, we provide a toilet, but I would just call this a privy. It's a very basic little toilet system. They're called wilderness latrines. And so we have signs to tell people, you know, the toilets are usually pretty far from the campsites. And then I like that somebody put up a little privacy screen on the one. It's pretty cute. And then, of course, you know, the sign that's not brushed and you can't hardly read it because it's also attached to a tree, like just bad examples, right? So next slide. So recently, I think it's just a couple years now, we've been working with the Mississippi River Headwaters Board on what we're calling partnership signs. And so they've been developing signs to put along it's the upper portion of the Mississippi River to get more paddlers to the river. And so these informational signs are on some kiosks and some parks in different cities and towns along the river to kind of help people maybe get some information so the next time they come around, they could maybe plan a paddling trip. I think this one's kind of based in like a picnic area. So just trying to provide information to people. Next slide. These are a little more closer up of those signs. And so you can kind of see they're just trying to give people information about the trip and pick out a start and an end point that makes sense for where you're at. And then telling there's a reassurance. The middle sign is like a reassurance sign. You're half hour to 45 minutes to the exit, just kind of giving people a heads up to start to look for the exit. And then the exit sign is the thank you for traveling this section of the river. You may exit here or continue your journey. And then it informs them where the next takeout is. And so I think these are just a really good example of a better sign options that we could have on the rivers. Okay, next slide. And then the Minnesota DNR is working on some new prototype signs. So they've confirmed we are going to move towards the aluminum signs. These are all just prototypes under review, but they want to provide templates for us from, you know, you know, it's this and this public water access to, you know, different arrow directions to different facilities within the grounds. So it's going to be like a whole system for every division in the agency. So I think it'll be really good. It's just been slow to come about. We will be able to have reflective options. They should be a lower cost and they should be a longer life. So very much looking forward to going this route in the hopefully starting next year, but we'll see. Next slide. And then I thought this would just be of interest to people. In Minnesota, we've been taking out dams and replacing them with these rock arch rapids. And so you can kind of see the picture with the green. This one was kind of an earthen dam with a road over the top. And they actually moved, put in a bridge and moved the road and took out the dam and create these rock arch rapids, hold the water back. So you keep the lake. So you can see the fishing pier is kind of still up above on the lake in these pictures. And when the water is higher, like obviously the winter picture, the water is very low, but when the water is higher, paddlers can paddle through these, but then they also allow for fish passage. So it's just kind of a cool initiative we have going on in Minnesota. And next slide. That's it for me. There's my contact information, and I am going to pass it over to Jack Henderson.
Awesome. Thanks, Nancy. Really enjoy learning about other water trail programs and especially, you know, the states that have a statewide program like that. So my name is Jack Henderson. I work for a nonprofit organization. This presentation is going to be a little bit different in that it kind of focuses on a single water trail, paddle trail that's managed instead of the state government by a network of nonprofits and local organizations and state and local governments, or sorry, local governments and things like that as well. So a little bit different. A little bit of a disclaimer here. Some of the imagery you might see is kind of interesting. We here on the French Broad, which is in Western North Carolina, were hit quite hard by Hurricane Helene over the last couple of weeks. We are definitely still very much in a kind of emerging from rescue and coming into recovery mode. And so part of my job, focuses on managing this paddle trail and supporting our other staff that focus on the river. But right now that looks like kind of assessing the condition of a lot of our amenities along the paddle trail in terms of access points and campsites and things like that. So what we're talking about today is pretty relevant because we're kind of in the midst of this signage replacement project. And given that we just withstood quite a bit of flooding on our river, we're kind of thinking strategically about where and how we invest in signage, but also other things like our campsites and access points and things like that. So slide, please. Just wanted to mention that kind of going in. So as you can see on here, the French Broad Paddle Trail, overall, it's a 140-mile paddle trail between Rosman, North Carolina, which is in kind of southwestern North Carolina, and Newport, Tennessee, about 115 miles in North Carolina and the remaining in Tennessee. And our nonprofit, Mountain True, we're a regional environmental and stewardship-based nonprofit that focuses on clean water, resilient forests, and healthy communities. And our Clean Waters program hosts river keeper programs that focus on swimmable, drinkable, and fishable waters. And our French Broad River Keeper program, based in Asheville, which is where I live, also hosts this French Broad Paddle Trail program. And we're one of many nonprofits and local governments and outfitters and partners that work together to create access points, campsites, signage, information, stewardship, and events, and things like that. And as it says there, the French Broad River is actually a state trail as well. North Carolina has a state trails program, only a few of which are paddle trails, the rest are terrestrial, and those trails are deemed to be of a certain cultural and recreational significance, and thus kind of are elevated amongst the state government, and resources are appropriated accordingly. Slide, please. And so I just want to kind of give you a scene of what this river looks like kind of before we dive in a little bit further into our signage project that we're working on, and it can kind of complement what Nancy was talking about. So in the headwaters, it's steep. There's good white water. It's in the Pisgah National Forest and Nantahala National Forest, places that even non-flood or hurricane years receive quite a bit of rainfall. And so we're blessed to have good water quality kind of coming from our headwaters with corresponding recreational opportunities. Slide, please. In Transylvania County, which is where the headwaters are, but kind of once it leaves the mountains, it actually flattens out pretty quick. There's really beautiful opportunities for beginner-friendly paddling through here. The river is narrow, generally fairly shallow, ample opportunities for access and campsites, and just have like a pretty strong paddling outfitter culture. Slide, please. And then the next county here is Henderson County, below Transylvania or downstream of Transylvania. River kind of widens up a little bit, still very flat and gentle, large floodplains, lots of farmland, good fishing, things of that nature. Slide, please. And then Buncombe County, that's where Asheville is. So Buncombe County is where the river kind of transitions from this kind of like farmland floodplain environment to much more industrialized and developed, that there's lots of greenways and parks and some impervious surface development in the form of older buildings and roads and things like that. The river also just topographically begins to constrict, and the mountains kind of come in closer to the water in these sections, and as a result you see kind of more rapids and riffles and things like that. Slide, please. And then below Buncombe County, you get into Madison County, which is kind of where the really good whitewater is. There's kind of classic whitewater sections like Section 9 and Section 10, and you kind of get into National Forest land again. You get into Pisgah National Forest again within North Carolina, and then Cherokee National Forest as you come into Tennessee. But this is kind of where the river really begins to constrict tightly. The gradient increases. It's much more kind of a wild, remote feel. Slide, please. And then last, we've got Cotton County in Tennessee. So kind of each of these counties has roughly maybe 30 miles or so of river within them. They split pretty evenly. And Cotton County is where the river kind of leaves some of the bigger whitewater of Madison County in North Carolina, and kind of starts to slacken out a little bit as it enters Douglas Lake near Newport, Tennessee. And below Douglas Lake, the French Broad confluences with the Holston River to form the Tennessee River. And so Cott County is really pretty. It's kind of remote still, big mountains, and a mixture of big mountains and floodplain along the sides of the river, and national forest land and private land alike. Slide, please. So as I mentioned, in North Carolina, the French Broad River is a state trail, and you can kind of see a map there of different state trails across the state and where we are within that. And then also in Tennessee, the French Broad is a scenic river. It's not an exact analog of a program, but Tennessee has a state scenic rivers program, which identifies rivers of a special kind of cultural and biological significance, and the French Broad is considered that too. So both of these to say that the French Broad is not just a fun recreational river for paddle trail stuff, but also just appreciated for a wide variety of things. Slide, please. Cool. So now we're getting into signage. So the French Broad River as a paddle trail originated back in 2010. The state trail was actually designated in 1987, but really between then and the early 2000s, most of the work that happened was really focused on establishing access points, kind of the beginnings of some signage, kind of getting a coalition together to work together to actually do this recreational programming. Because contrary to Nancy's program in Minnesota, we don't have like a state water trails program. Like we have a state trail planners that help with things like kind of thinking about access point arrangement and signage designs to some degree, but they're really more just kind of cheerleaders on the sideline that kind of help support what local partners are doing. We don't have here actual state level staff that kind of go out and do this work. I would love to have a robust program like that, to be honest, just to kind of raise tides across the whole state. But in the absence, we have a good network of partners that work locally. So here on the left, this is just a picture of kind of one of these early kiosk signages that we had. I don't have a close up because a lot of these are kind of in flux, but as you can see, the original ones were very, very wordy, had lots of text on them, some kind of cultural pictures and things like that, a map that may have been kind of based in aerial imagery, kind of all things considered not bad, but not as good as they could be. And so kind of as we thought about new signage, which we're kind of working through right now, we kind of took stock of what currently existed, and the bulk of what existed were access point or signage at access points that focused on navigation and wayfinding and safety, cultural stuff, environmental stuff, flora, fauna, things of that nature, a little bit of information around surrounding management. So that existed at most public access points. Then we also had signage at campsites. So across the French Broad River, there's probably, I think, around 35 public access points and maybe about 15 to 20 different campsites. And those campsites vary between ones that we manage, Mountain True manages, and ours are very basic. They have, basic amenities like an access point to the river, some signage like you see, a fire ring, a table, picnic table, like an elevated composting toilet. That's kind of about it. Just given, as I mentioned with Helene, and even aside from that, we get a lot of flooding in this watershed. A lot of these campsites are built to flood. We try to make the amenities that are there very durable or secure so that we don't lose things when floodwaters, happen. As a result, they're pretty basic, and we don't have the ability to have ground level latrines, but we do have toilets up in tree houses at some sites that allow for kind of composting and removal and management, and other sites don't have those things. It just kind of varies on the site. However, there are also some campsites along this river that are managed by private entities, and so they have road access perhaps, and they've got other ways of getting in and kind of manage those accordingly. But for the time being, at our sites, this is what things look like. Slide, please. So also kind of to complement or to match what Nancy was talking about, we also maintain a website. I won't get into the details of it here, but FrenchBroadPaddle.com is that website. You're welcome to take a look. It's fairly new. We had an older website from about 2010 up until about 2022. And during last year and this year, we put together a new website that's just a little more beginner friendly. As part of that site, we have a page like Nancy's that has a web map, and we base ours in Google Maps. We have pins for existing access points, campsites, known blockages, mile markers, outfitters, things like that. And people can open that Google My Maps link from their phone in the field and kind of see where they are. We also, I don't have a link on here, an image on here. We also maintain a print map that's currently in transition as well. It was in booklet form, and people could kind of look on that while they're out in the field and kind of see where they were in comparison to the web map. That said, though, we're working on a new print map right now that will be available in events like Nancy was talking about, and also be on access point signage and things like that, and kind of just jive all together with everything else. But we're kind of focusing on just the signage for this right now. And then last, on that website page, we have a short description that talks about obstructions that exist along the river that kind of match what's on the map. Slide, please. And also just on the website too, we have listings of access points by mile marker, the name and outfitters. Slide, please. And then those also match up with the campsites too. So the idea with all this is, in the past, we kind of had these kiosk signs, we had a website, we had a print map, and none of them kind of aligned. Like, they all had similar information, but there's a lot of just like inconsistencies between the resources. So now our primary goal was to have all of our communication resources aligned together. So whether you're looking at a website print map, the listing of access points, or a web or our print map or other things, they all kind of went together. Slide, please. And so the end of last year, or sorry, the end of 2 years ago, end of 2022, we started really talking about renewing our signage along the river, kind of in follow-up to redoing the website and the print map. We wanted to renew the branding. We kind of went through this branding process with the website. We wanted to kind of make sure that what existed on the ground aligned nicely with what was on the website. And so we hired a local kind of, signage design outdoor recreation firm that does this kind of work, and kind of begin to inventory existing resources. And one of the big ones for that was American Whitewater's open source signage toolbox, which came out around the same time, kind of in 2022. And while this is focused on, Whitewater in a lot of ways, it had really good information around things to include, symbology, kind of making your signage more equitable in terms of language or reducing text and things like that. So this document was one of many resources that we use to focus our new signage, but I wanted to call attention to it here because it's such a nice new contemporary resource. Slide, please. Slide, please. Awesome. Cool. So here, this is just kind of like an overview of the new signage that we worked on. I'll kind of dig into it more deeply here in a second, but I wanted to give you kind of just a sense of kind of what it looked like. And so the new signage, we really wanted to be just focused primarily on kind of bullet point style text, a little bit, definitely some iconography, some engaging imagery, just kind of draw people in and not have people be overwhelmed by kind of what they see, kind of right off the bat. And so we worked with this designer to create templates instead of having them create, access point kiosk signage for 35 different sites. To save money and efficiency and time, we had them do templates that we could fill in ourselves site by site. And within that, we kind of settled into these different themes. And so you kind of see there on those first, second, and third, and the last, or sorry, first and second, and third and fourth signs, there's different themes kind of in that orange text. I'll get into that here in a second. And then for the campsites, kind of wanted to make them bright, fun, have that new signage or have that new branding, and kind of lay out certain rules. So at kiosks, we have the main sign. At campsites, we have a river-facing sign to let you know where you are and that you're approaching the campsite. Then we have a campsite-facing sign that has the rules and regulations. Slide, please. Cool. So I'm just going to go through these kind of one by one here. So we split the river up kind of into themes, kind of for the sake of like branding and fun, but also to kind of give a sense of what the character is like. So the first theme is this farmlands and fishings region. That kind of covers all of Transylvania County and most of Henderson. And, most of the signage is consistent, but some of the things around safety and appropriate watercraft, things like that, we wanted to kind of focus into that. So slide, please. Kind of focusing in on that side actually go back a slide, please, if you don't mind too. Sorry. As you can see here in terms of layout, on the left side, kind of has a mixture of like fun, engaging information. There's information around how many more miles to the next access point, some basic stuff around access point managers. So those get filled in around like who manages the site, who do you call if there's an emergency or stewardship need, what's your location, kind of things like that. And then kind of down in that yellow text below it, you get more into like information, you get into like rules per se, kind of wayfinding information, symbology, and some other resources around like flows and gauges and like aquatic nuisance species, etc. And those have links, that kind of go out to those sources on our website or other websites. So zooming in on the right side, it would be a big map. Some of the feedback we got when we were scoping for this and seeking public input for this was to have a really good, robust map, kind of better than the last one. And so on this is a placeholder here. We're currently working on the new map internally, and then that'll go on that space when it's done. So these signs kind of incorporate both of those amenities together. Slide, please. So kind of focusing in on that there, so you can see this is where, that kind of green area kind of just gives a first and foremost, like, hey, this section's beginner friendly. It doesn't have white water. It's pretty, flat and slow, no big deal. The things next to it kind of focus more into the access point, management, emergency situations and information. And then the rest of it's kind of focused more on things you need to know kind of then and there. So the goal of these was to equip people to be prepared, kind of in terms of what they need to expect when they go out in this section of river, and also kind of like basic things around what to have, and maybe what to, and then what to consider when they're out there. So it kind of gets into the rules in terms of basic things around life jackets and glass and, leave no trace and basic things like that. Suitable watercraft in terms of like, yeah, this section's, great for all kinds of things. Whereas a whitewater section, maybe tubing's not appropriate. Suggested paddling gear, and then hazards and things like that. So on this section, river hazards that are important are, things kind of more like riverwide wooded debris and things like that. And then get into water quality and whatnot too. Slide, please. The next one, kind of the northern Henderson County, kind of going into northern Henderson County going into Buncombe. We kind of call it the greenways and IPAs area because you get into these river parks and you get into systems around breweries and greenways and kind of more of like an urbanized infrastructure. So the safety and information and things kind of in those text boxes are more or less the same as the upper stream sections, given the character is similar. Although we do have a few run-of-river dams in these sections, so we call attention to that as a hazard. Next slide, please. And then further down, we have our whitewater and wilderness region. And this is kind of that northern Madison County and Cock County where there's some whitewater, it's more remote, there's more public land. And given that within these sections, they kind of all have the whitewater and wilderness feel, but some are like much more whitewater than others. And so we kind of broke these into two different styles, one of which is like, hey, there's like big whitewater and rafting here. The other ones, has some whitewater, but it's a little more flat and slow. And if you go one slide forward, please. The kind of safety information for this is a little bit different into where the caution river hazards area has stuff around whitewater rapids. Paddling gear includes more robust items like a helmet and a throwback, things like that. And then suitable watercraft for here. Do you see tubing in this? The final signage did not have that. I think I pulled this from an earlier template version. But overarchingly, we have kind of the control over kind of adding or subtracting these icons accordingly. And just across the board, the goal with this was to kind of remove text, kind of focus more on iconography and symbology, trying to make it more universally, recognizable to people, regardless of kind of what they've seen before. Slide, please. So getting into campsite signage, again, our goals with this were just to be very clear, from the river. As Nancy mentioned, if you're paddling along, it's kind of easy to like miss a sign for a campsite. All of a sudden, you're 10 miles past your campsite and there's no more access points for 10 more miles and you're kind of screwed. And so, we hope that people don't just rely upon signage along the river, that they've also maybe brought a map, or kind of looked up their route ahead of time to kind of get a sense for things. And when people book our campsites, there's usually information on that page around like, hey, our campsite's about a mile past this bridge. Keep an eye out at that point, try to call more attention to it. However, people get distracted and whatever, and things happen. So we try to make our on-river signage kind of very bright and focused. And so it's kind of that bright red, very limited text. Our campsites that we manage are also available for day use, so people can pull off, have lunch there, go to the bathroom, hang out. If you camp there overnight, we ask that they have reservations, just because that way, people can kind of plan to go there. And if they didn't make a reservation, they can assume they're not able to go. That just helps restrict or remove the possibility for a duplicated visit or something like that. And we hope in the future to kind of have, more of a system where people can just kind of go at their own, first come, first serve system. But for now, this works a little bit better. Then facing into the campsite, we have a very basic rule sign. This information mirrors what people receive when they make a booking. Just kind of reminders around staying within these areas, leave no trace, kind of how to use the toilet, fires, picnic tables, things like that. And we've got an opportunity here and also on the other kiosk signage to call attention to sponsors or partners and things like that. Next slide, please. So here's just a picture. So just to be clear, our access point signage, we're still developing that. We're working on the maps right now. We're kind of creating these site-specific templates. And so those will be filled in with site-specific information, getting the iconography right, and then kind of making the maps appropriate. So those are still in flux, right? Or not in flux, in development right now. We hope to have those installed before summer of next year, although that's a little bit up in the air right now with kind of Hurricane Helene cleanup work. That said, though, we have proceeded with getting our new campsite signs in place. So this is on a campsite in Transylvania County. I'm pleased to report those signs are still there post-flood, although the water was literally 8 feet above the ground there at its worst, and they're all still there, which is great. But these are kind of showing you what they look like in the field. We have a very simple, just kind of locust post design. We also try to keep them off the trees, so on and so forth. Slide, please. And so I guess that's it for now. We can have some time for questions. I wanted to mention a couple of things, just kind of that I heard in Nancy's presentation, I think are relevant. Given that the French Broad fluctuates so much in terms of water level and vegetation and debris, we don't do mile marker signage. In the past, we have and tried it, and we've just had issues with those kind of washing away. We are working on doing more signage around bridges, so kind of having signs on bridges to where people can know where they are, maybe mileage to the next access point, etc. We really just kind of focused in on having durable signage in places that are developed and durable, like access points, bridges, campsites, things like that, and kind of reducing signage in places that aren't as accessible or maintainable, just because our staff and partners are so limited to maintain those. But with that, thanks for your time, and I'm happy to tag team questions with Nancy here, or you have my contact on the screen there for the future. Thanks. Back to you, Becca or James. I think we've still got maybe 20 minutes or so for questions.
Thanks. Yeah. So anybody that has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself, raise your hand, and using the. There we go. We have John has a question, so you can go ahead and unmute yourself and go ahead, John.
Thanks. That was both presentations were great. I guess this one would be mostly for Jack. The campsites, the primitive sites that you have, are those all on public land, or are there any kind of lease agreements involved in that? How's that been working?
That's a great question. Yeah, so I didn't go super in depth in terms of the management of our access points and campsites, given this was focused on signage overall, but I certainly understand that those all go together. So Mountain True manages 6 going on 7 Riverside campsites, and those are on a mixture of lands that we have leased from protected property owners like land trusts. So our sites are on they're long-term protected properties that we lease from the owners from. We also have a couple on some state-owned islands. They're not state park lands or forest lands. They're just kind of state trust property that are public lands. We have a lease to allow us to kind of do paddle trail programming on those locations. And then we also have a couple campsites on, or I guess we have one on federal land, on national forest land. That's also in the same way, where it's public land, anyone can go there. Mm-hmm. We kind of have a special use agreement that allows us to do this work there.
All right, fantastic. Thank you.
All right, don't be shy. Any more questions, folks?
I see something in the chat here, maybe from RMS.
Yeah, I think Risa's dropped in a comment. Jack and Nancy, some of your signs are simple. Do you want to read it, Risa?
Sure, mainly because I don't think I wrote it very well there. So some of your signs like put in or portage, those are super basic. You can see them from far away. And then some of yours, Jack, are like bold with the image and a few messages. And then some of them are very text heavy, instructions, like you need to, take a few minutes to read it. Have you thought about guidance on, like you're not going to read a detailed text heavy sign from the river. You need to be on top of it, or you need to be sitting like under Nancy's kiosk, like you're there to read instructions. Have you thought about that? So I kind of went into it a little bit, like font and line spacing, how dense to be if you're going to be you know, don't expect anyone to read X amount that's, you know, too much text if they're on the river or more than 10 feet away, you know, anything like that. Cause
Yeah.
that's sort of like Wild Wild West to me.
Sure, I'm happy to offer a couple of thoughts, but I also want to hear Nancy's on this too, just because we're kind of in the midst of redesigning these. So yeah,
Yeah.
all the kiosk signage, the access point signage that you saw, those are all to be located at river access points. So these are, you know, boat ramps or parks where access happens. And so the idea with that is to have more detail, again, trying to reduce the amount of text from the previous versions so people can kind of be there and digest it, whether they're paddling that day or they are just for other reasons. They can kind of see that and learn and then come back to it. So that was designed to have enough information to where people would kind of have a hierarchy of reading to where like the bullet points around like safety, preparedness, wayfinding kind of jumped out at you first and foremost. And then the things that are kind of more around narrative stuff like additional resources, information about management, etc., was a little bit more you know, text heavy, but kind of lower in the hierarchy. So we try to just think about how to capture people's attention first and then kind of go down from there. And that was a mixture of what was based on learning from American Whitewater's open source signage toolbox, and then also some of the advice of the designer we worked with to lay these out, kind of based on other things. And then in terms of the campsite stuff, yeah, those are big enough to where they're readable from the river. I think the text, I forgot what the text size is, but I think the signs are like 2 feet by 2 feet. We went as big as we could, and those are, you know, pretty recognizable from that space. And then the other stuff is just visible from the inside. But yeah, we thought a lot about not just like size of text and all that, but just people's attention, just in terms of having them actually like get the information across in a short amount of time, given, you know, the lack of appetite usually in reading longer form stuff. And then with that, it was like, well, what do we want to communicate? And it was like, you know, being safe, not getting lost, and being prepared, and kind of like what those things are together. And that kind of came in the form of knowing what the hazards are, knowing what to bring and where, and then kind of like knowing what resources exist to look after that, and the map being consistent throughout all of it. Nancy, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, so in Minnesota, we have obviously gone with like less is more type of signage. We have a lot of individual signs with messages. So sometimes they end up being kind of put on what we call like a sign board if you need to put up like, you know, 3 or 4 signs with the different messages. So we haven't gone with like the big full kiosk of one point of information. But one highly requested item from visitors is like having a map that goes with the sign information. And so um, we prototyped them in a few spots, but being a big state system and maps requiring a lot of input, we just haven't been able to go there. And so that's why like you see the maps with the partner signs, because the partner could do it, but the state and the water trail program just haven't been able to get that done. So you know, I love the one kind of the one-stop shop for all the information on a sign, but also like, you know, for a user on the river, an icon and a word makes a lot of sense. So
Yeah, I'll just add, like, I love the small, simple one-word signs like that. Like, I wish we could do more of that, just kind of given kind of how things are arranged. We just, you know, here on the French Broad specifically have more issues around flooding and debris and things like that, and just like don't have the capacity to maintain that. But like I've spent time in the Boundary Waters and other places where they have really good little simple things like that, and they're great. We just kind of focus in on maintaining fewer things that have as, you know, broad of impact as possible.
Looks like we've got a couple of questions in the chat, and one of them is, how do you plan for sign theft? How often do you monitor your signage assets?
Nancy, you should go on that because your signs are cooler and look like they want to be stolen. The little wooden ones.
we don't have like an inventory of signs. I guess I just trust the staff to come forward with their requests when they need new signs. And so then we, you know, we have to figure out what we need, get them ordered, get them made, and then out to the areas, and then they have to get out to get them put up. So it's probably kind of a delayed process for replacement. And then what was the first part of the question?
Oh, theft.
Oh,
Do you connect
theft.
to that, or does that happen?
We get more vandalism, I would say, than theft. Like you show up to a site and the sign is all shot up or painted over. And like the aluminum signs, obviously it's really easy to replace. We probably have, replacements in warehouses, but or in their shops. But the wood rotted ones take a little while, but they could probably be fixed or painted in the short term.
Yeah, and for us, we're the same way. We rarely ever have theft. Most of our signs are like bolted through locust or into like kiosks that would just be challenging to steal. But they do occasionally get, graffitied on at public parks and that kind of stuff. And we just have a budget to where we replace those as we're able to, and just hopefully it happens less and less. But we do deal with that. And I can read this out loud. I'm seeing from Matthew Terry in the chat. I guess this question's from me. Jack, any sense about potential interest from the state of North Carolina to create a river trails program like Minnesota? And so, yeah, I'll say we do have a state trails program. It's within state parks. Just that staff and program doesn't physically manage the rivers or the trails for that matter. We just don't have that kind of program. I mean, that would be really cool in a lot of ways, although it kind of seems like, with the passage of some recent funding through our General Assembly and some other grant sources that are coming around, the state has been doing a very good job of putting more and more funding out to our state trail programs. And so I think um, their kind of like methodology with this and way they're approaching it, their approach is more to add capacity and fund local groups doing the work versus having their staff out and about. We do have a robust state parks program, obviously, that that has staff on the ground. But I'd be curious maybe just to hear a little about Nancy's program and kind of how that works, just because it might help me kind of think about if and how we might model that here one day.
Yeah, so in Minnesota, obviously there's legislation that creates the state water trail program, and I think it started in like the 1960s, when they had legislated like 5 water trails, and it's grown over the years. So now we sort of have some requirements put together, so we don't just get every river in the state. We want them to have some specialness, some feature to them that makes them great to promote for paddling and be a state water trail. Our funding, we have actually pretty good funding in the state, where we do require, some paddlecraft to register, which helps put money into the account. And then the other, half of the funds is actually either a state gas tax, and then there's also some match with some federal funds. And we have always kind of put money towards non-motorized access as well as the motorized boating, and it's both are pretty big in the state. So I think there's always just been really good support. Again, a lot of our carry and access sites are pretty basic and I would say rustic, but they work for users. So now we're trying to get out more like accessible kayak launch docks and promote the best sections of the rivers to paddle for people. So just trying to narrow down that 4,500 miles into the kind of the best areas to send people.
Awesome. There's another note or question in the chat for you, Nancy. Some of your signs reference time instead of distance. Since time varies with water conditions, why did you choose that instead of distance?
We've had input from users who want to know how long it's going to take, and so again, that does vary. But I think when you get somebody who can go out maybe in a couple different water level conditions and paddle it, they can kind of put in, that average amount of time for people. So, but it's just been highly requested by water trail users is how much time is that going to take us?
Yeah, I'll add the same thing on our end. As we're kind of thinking about this new signage and putting into practice, mileage is important just to be consistent, but also people have had the same input, and we We're doing that. A lot of our state trail planners have also encouraged that as a best practice. But it's for us, especially given the French Broad is a free flowing river. We have a few run of river dams that don't really affect the overarching flow. But given it varies so much in terms of flow, we're trying to be cautious around how we communicate that through people. Don't think something's going to take shorter than it will. So we try to go more on the conservative side in terms of putting a longer time versus a shorter time. And from Becca, I guess for both of us, there's a question on how do you all link your signage to your website content and digital maps, success or interest in QR codes? And so, yeah, our new signage that we're doing, the versions I shared in here were not the exact final ones. We're kind of still doing them piece by piece for certain sites. We do have URLs on those for page by page because it just kind of fit better, but we're planning to do one QR code for just the overarching website, just for the homepage. And people seem to like QR codes, but sometimes it's nice just for sake of space to do URLs for certain pages, especially if it's kind of like a short URL overall.
Yeah, and I would say for Minnesota, the maps, especially if you do like the Avenza map, the GeoPDF, you're gonna know where you are on the water trail. The maps, I think, are really good. People love the maps. If they are trip planning, get the maps ahead of time to kind of study their route, that sort of thing. We haven't used a lot of QR codes, and now I hear that QR codes are getting spammed by groups and stuff, and so it just hasn't been something that we wanted to go to, just because they're hard to, if you change something in the pages and the QR codes don't work and that sort of thing. Probably very well known as advertising just our webpage and where to find stuff on the webpage. So lots of visits, a lot of effort put into keeping up the web pages for the state. But again, there's kind of a robust staff for both GIS information, the webpage information, and mapping. So
I didn't have a screenshot of this because I was focusing on the signage versus the website. But Nancy, we have a flows and gauges page on our site, kind of showing the water levels and kind of how that relates to like if it's high, medium, or low. And we based it off of y'all's page because yours is really good. A little bit different in terms of how it's set up, but we kind of based some of the design there. So thanks for the good work there.
yeah, that was another highly requested amenity. If you have those water gauges out there, why not interpret them for paddling? And so really a really cool feature that's provided. And I'm always tweaking them just based on user feedback, but they're really really well regarded.
Well, we want to thank Jack and Nancy for their wonderful presentations today. We only have a couple more minutes. So we have a couple more slides that we want to share with y'all to remind folks to subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can view past river management roundtables and a whole bunch of other stuff. Also like to remind everybody that's here that may not be a member that there are many benefits to being a member. So consider joining RMS as a member. And then I'm going to turn it over to Becca, who is going to talk about upcoming events.
Thanks, James, and also thanks, Nancy and Jack, and everyone for all the great questions. So yeah, we have several upcoming events. As James mentioned in the beginning, we have river management roundtables every month on the second Tuesday of the month. The next topic is wild and scenic rivers water quality. There's a resource that's been in development for over a year that is now published. So we'll have a new tool to share with you. So yeah, that'll be November 12th. Then we have a river careers discussion series going on right now. This will be the third session of a 4-part series. This session is called Essential Skills and Certifications for River Related Careers. This has been a super popular series for students and early career professionals who just kind of want to know what's out there in terms of river careers, river related jobs. There is an upcoming Southeast chapter trip on the James River. And there's a big educational component to that, some networking opportunities for folks in the Southeast or beyond. They've got a new permitting system, I believe, and you'll get to learn about how they manage an urban whitewater river, as well as some history, wildlife, and ecology. That's October 19th. Also, the A- Collaborative has another webinar coming up October 24th. RMS is involved with that collaborative. So that's why we're highlighting that. But it's called Exploring the Human Elements of Your Risk Management Plan. So kind of building in the workplace culture and being proactive about that in terms of risk management on the water and in outdoor workspaces. And finally, this is not an exhaustive list, but we have a very popular stream restoration course coming up in November. This is the second time we've offered it this year and like the 5th or 6th time in over 3 years. It's a 3-day virtual course with Dr. John Field. There's info about that in our calendar. I put the link to our calendar in the chat, and there will be more events. And as James mentioned, it's RMS a membership organization. Members get these kind of events in their inboxes. So shameless plug to stay connected with all of the fun folks here.
Awesome. And finally, we also have a survey. So we're always trying to continue to improve product and hear what y'all's thoughts are. And so we can continue to build really useful roundtables. So let us know what y'all think. And we want to thank y'all for coming. And we especially want to thank our presenters today, Jack and Nancy. And we hope to see y'all at the next roundtable and again soon, or one of our many events.